Welcome to F&I Today.
Well, according to a driving sales study, 61% of vehicle shoppers walk into the dealership without prior contact. Since filling out lead forms is becoming a thing of the past, there's a lot of buzz out there about soft credit pull pre-screen and pre-qualification products to capture consumer engagement online. And what do you think about these kinds of products?
I think they're great products, especially when you think about how consumers are wanting to move more of the process online. Dealers want to get more information about the consumers online, to try to start that journey of purchasing a vehicle. So now the soft credit pull thing is something that both of those products, whether it's a pre-screen or a pre-qual, neither of those require or have an impact on a consumer's credit score. That's what I mean by a soft pull. There's no FICO score impact on those inquiries. So they both operate that way similarly, but some of the requirements and things are quite diverse in terms of what you can and can't do with those types of products.
So what are the differences between pre-screen and pre-qualification?
Well, the FCRA has very clear rules about what's required from a compliance standpoint, right? In reference to that side, but in reference to, on the very basic level, both products that are pre-screen credit pulls do not require Social Security, and neither impact the customer's FICO credit score. Pre-screen does not require consumer consent. Pre-qualification does, okay? I like taking the more conservative approach of getting better information and also doing it transparently and with consumers' consent. So the pre-screen product also requires that the dealer provide a firm offer of credit. So you have to provide a firm offer of credit letter. You have to have proof of the criteria that you use to give it to them. You have to store that information for 3 years, right? So there's a lot of compliance requirements associated with that as well. When you move over to the pre-qual side, the consumer has already consented for you to access that information. You are not required to do a firm offer of credit. You are not required to do an adverse action or risk-based pricing notice, which you are required to do on the pre-screen, right? On the pre-qual, those items, the compliance side is much more simplified and much less stringent on the dealership. And the difference really goes back to the difference in the having consent versus not consent. And when you get consent, you have the rights to the entire 100% credit file of that consumer, whereas on a pre-screen you do not. My perspective, it's for the dealer understanding, what are you after? Do you just want more leads, or do you want more qualified people that want to move into a transaction so that you can really say, they're wanting to move to this car and this is qualified, and I can really look at what kind of payments that they qualify for this vehicle.
Well, let's talk about a true soft pull pre-qualification product. You guys actually offer that. One of the only companies that does that. So talk to us how Elin, bridges that gap, I guess, or helps dealers out.
Like through our system, we take it from a pre-qual online app on our system on a dealer's website, and then at the point it comes into a transactional sale and they want to push it from our system, say, into a dealer track or Route 1, and then process it and send it to the banks. That requires a subsequent consent from the consumer, saying, consumer, you're transitioning from pre-qualification to a true transactional purchase, which requires a secondary credit report, right? Right. A full credit report. So that consent has to be done. It has to be tracked. It has to be managed. It has to be stored, right? It has to be able to be retrieved and defended. And so we were able to build all of those back-end processes behind the scene that truly makes the product not only perform well for the dealer, but also protects the dealer in that regard, right? Permissible purpose standpoint, a trail, an electronic trail, who has that information and who's sharing it with who, right? So that's got to be protected too. So you have to have all those safeguards in place and identifying that there's a electronic trail of who's had access and touched that consumer's, PII information, right? And then on top of that, the data security. We want to make sure relative to safeguard rules and privacy policies under the GLBA, et cetera, that information is being protected, which includes credit report data, credit application information, stuff like that. That's imperative that all that information is protected. So what I would suggest for a dealer considering either of these products, whether it's a pre-screen or a pre-qual, that here's 3 questions that you would want to ask your vendor partner in considering those things. It's like, 1, can you provide certification from the credit repository that you're receiving the data that you are certified with them and that your security procedures are the highest level standards in the industry to support that product. So number 2, in the big thing is, what does the dealer really want? Does he want does he have an expectation of an entire full credit report and all the attributes which you would get with a pre-qualification? Or is he comfortable with some attributes like a FICO score and a range of FICO score and certain attributes? And based upon those, then the 3rd question I would ask, if I were to ask a vendor, is from a compliance standpoint, depending upon which product you choose, there's a lot more compliance restrictions and standards on a pre-screen versus a pre-qual. And is that vendor explaining those to what they are, and make sure that that vendor has the processes in place that can keep that dealer compliant and out of trouble so he doesn't end up in trouble and getting fined from one of the regulators.